Somebody brought up ancient Roman and Greek culture before. We're going to look at the God of War franchise. God of War taps into that romantic elevation of ancient cultures, specifically ancient Greece. And you can see the art direction there. It's kind of skewed, but you can see how it's not accurate, but it's evocative. That's deliberate. They use ancient Sparta particularly because it's a story of vengeance, but it's also a series about power and gender. And Sparta's very unique that way. Their specialty was military excellence. And so we have our protagonist, Kratos, who's a Spartan on steroids, which, you know, for a realistic depiction of history, nah. For a Byronic hero, awesome. He's powerful by mortal standards, but I don't know if you can see the chains on his wrists. It's kind of blurry. It shows that he's a plaything of the gods. He's actually a slave. He's granted this power, and then they go, psych! That is sort of the ongoing dynamic, because part of the thing about Kratos is if at any point he feels too powerful, you can't root for him anymore because he'd just be a bully. The real power in God of War, there's a bit more about him. The real power in God of War belongs to the player, not Kratos. You can make Kratos run around and jump around and slaughter things any way you like. This immediately diminishes him in spite of all his muscles and yelling. He's still him in the emotional moments, those narrative moments, but in combat, he's being controlled by a higher power, i.e. you. And in the game's narrative, this is the very thing making him miserable. And they compound the smallness by using that romantic artistic technique that dwarfs this big, powerful, awesome Spartan on steroids. I don't know if you can even see him in that second image. He's right here. And that character he's standing on is female, but we'll get to that in a bit. But the other thing about God of War is its ultra-violent combat style. That is Kratos pulling out a Cyclops eye. The games are unapologetically violent because it delves into the Western romanticization of violence. They're continuing the tradition of Lord Byron and Sir Walter Scott, violence and drama in exotic settings. And Scott is particularly interesting because he worked in prose as well as poetry at the time that was considered junk art. And, you know, video games kind of occupy that place right now. The interesting thing, you can sort of, this is a guy getting his head ripped off. That's one of the most popular images from the whole franchise. That's Helios, and he's ripping off his head so we can use him as a lantern. But this, you know, the thing about this, he doesn't just kill because he has to. He doesn't just kill because he's good at it. He kills for the visceral thrill. Because Sparta didn't have morality like we believe. This is touching on something from earlier today again. Sparta had an ethical system, but not really a moral one, and it was all based on victory in combat. So Kratos is the absurd extreme of what militaristic cultures and cultures that define and promote rigid definitions of masculinity do to their men. And believe it or not, you buy in completely when you play the game. And that's important because we as a culture love our gladiators. You know, that's UFC, which, you know, we love our masculinity. We love it even when it's stupid. Sometimes we love it because it's stupid. You know, does anybody question why bacon is a meme? You know, but you can't have men without women. So let's briefly look at the women of God of War. It's kind of muddy, but I wanted to show sort of, for a video game done by a, you know, a masculine perspective, you get some decent diversity among the women. And the cool thing is a lot of these women are gods, which means they're calling the shots. It's important in Sparta because Sparta, men tended to die. So women weren't necessarily valued by a culture, but they had to be given a basic quality of life so they could produce more men. And part of that was that promiscuity and chastity weren't valued like we do here. You needed that birthright. And so, yeah, God of War jokes that it's historically accurate sex and violence, but then you get into the idea of women warrior gods and what happens when you have a female fighter, and we get into that issue of violence against women. You know, are these pictures of equality? You can't really see them. But, you know, one is Kratos ripping off a woman's arm. We're trained by our culture to be shocked, but let's think about Spartan cultural norms. You know, Kratos has rules for women. You can read that while I talk. Social role is more important to Kratos than gender when it comes to women. If a woman's a warrior, he fights her. If a woman's Aphrodite, you know, the other thing is that God of War sidesteps the idea of rape as a weapon of war because it wouldn't occur to Spartans. They believe themselves to be superior, including genetically superior. And that means, why would you impregnate the enemy with the genetically superior warrior who will then try to kill you? It doesn't really make any sense in this version of Sparta, which is myth as well as history, and that's the speculative angle. But the last thing I want to touch on with God of War is it takes this masculinity, all this stuff that we're like, bacon, and it turns it on its ear because it deals with a very serious issue affecting militaries in war-torn cultures, post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is a character at the beginning of the very first game tries to commit suicide. And this is a massive, massive issue with men. And the fact that a hyper-masculinized game that deals with the perfect warrior shows him attempting suicide, I'm hoping that it will encourage men who play the game to talk about their own struggles. And that's why this big emotional journey of a masculinized hero is so important from a modern social justice perspective. And you've got the flashbacks, the problem with the reintegration, all this stuff. This is heavy stuff for a thing that's been dismissed as male power fantasy. And then I just put in a picture of Kratos with his daughter because it's adorable. Unfortunately, he kills her because Ares tricks him, but it's still cute.